There's a man standing outside Buckingham Palace right now who knows more about his own job than every YouTube video, every tourist pamphlet, and every overly confident American dad combined. He just can't say so. That's the part nobody talks about. His name was Corporal Daniel Finch, 26 years old, from Shropshire, which is a place most people haven't heard of and fewer can find on a map, which suited him fine because Daniel Finch had spent the last 3 years learning to be invisible inside his own face. That is harder than it sounds. He joined the Coldstream Guards at 18, not because of some grand patriotic vision, not because his grandfather had served, though he had, but because Daniel Finch was the kind of young man who needed structure the way some people need noise. His brain didn't quiet down on its own. Never had. The regiment gave it something to lock onto. Drill, routine, ceremony. The busby, that enormous black fur hat that tourists photographed like it was an artifact from another dimension, sat exactly 1 inch above his eyebrows. He knew the measurement by feel now. He'd stopped thinking about it the way you stop thinking about your tongue in your mouth, and then you're thinking about your tongue again. He wasn't thinking about the hat. He was thinking about the tourist in the yellow raincoat. It was a Tuesday in October. That particular breed of London Tuesday that can't decide if it wants to be autumn or just gray. The sky had the color of an old tea towel. The tourists on the forecourt below the railings were doing what tourists always did, forming little clusters, murmuring to each other in Italian and Japanese, and a flat, projecting American English that carried like a foghorn across the whole of the mall. Daniel had a sightline that could swallow 40 people at once. He used it. Not because anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong. It never was, and yet it always had to be watched like something might be, which is its own kind of exhaustion that nobody outside the regiment fully understood. His mother used to ask him if the job was boring. He never knew how to answer that. It wasn't boring. It was a sustained performance of stillness that required absolute alertness. Like sleeping with one eye open, except you weren't sleeping. You were standing in bearskin and a tunic the color of arterial blood in 40-degree October wind, and a man was pointing at you from 15 feet away while explaining you to his wife. That was the yellow raincoat. His name, Daniel would learn later, much later, from a fragment of conversation he wasn't supposed to hear, was Gary. Gary from Scottsdale, Arizona. Gary was perhaps 55, built like a man who'd played college football and then spent 30 years explaining that he'd played college football. He had the confidence of someone who had Googled something once and considered himself an expert. Gary was describing Daniel to his wife. His wife, small, patient-faced, wearing a Union Jack tote bag that had been purchased approximately 40 minutes ago from the gift shop on Buckingham Palace Road, was nodding in the way people nod when they are listening but also quietly planning dinner. "So here's the thing," Gary said loudly. "They are not allowed to move." His wife nodded. "At all?" She nodded again. "Like legally, they literally cannot respond to you, it's a rule." Daniel kept his eyes at the mid-distance, jaw set, a line between his brows that had nothing to do with concentration and everything to do with the word literally being deployed in that particular way. "Now see what I read," Gary continued, and here he adopted the posture of a man delivering a TED talk to an audience of one, "is that they go through this insane training. Like, they train them specifically not to react. Like years of it." This was not incorrect. It was also not quite right in the way that things are often not quite right when someone has watched a 3-minute documentary and absorbed it as gospel. Daniel had not spent years being trained not to react. He had spent weeks in drill learning to maintain bearing under provocation, yes, but the deeper truth was quieter and stranger than that. The real training was more internal. It was the slow accumulation of standing here, in this spot, in all weathers, while the world treated you like a costume exhibit, until you built something inside yourself that was not indifference. Indifference was too easy, too brittle, but something more like amusement. Private amusement. The kind that lived in the chest and never reached the face. Gary leaned slightly toward his wife, the way people lean when they think they're being subtle. "I bet if I really tried," he said, "like if I really committed to it, I could make him laugh." His wife looked at Daniel, then back at Gary. "Please don't. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just saying hypothetically." "Gary, I'm just saying the guy's gotta have a breaking point." "He does not have a breaking point, Gary." Daniel's eyes did not move. But something happened inside his sternum, very small, very contained. Something that in a different context, a pub, a barracks common room, a Tuesday evening at his mum's kitchen table, would have come out as a short, sharp laugh. Because Gary's wife was right. Not about the breaking point. Gary's wife was right about something more interesting than a breaking point. She was right because she'd looked at Daniel, actually looked at him briefly, the way people rarely did when they were busy narrating, and something in her face had shifted. Not pity, not awe. Just recognition. Like she understood for 1/2 second that there was a person in there. Daniel filed this away the way he filed everything, quietly, in the place behind his eyes where all of it lived. This is the thing visitors to the forecourt never fully grasped, and that Daniel had stopped expecting them to grasp. He was not a statue. He was not an attraction. He was not the human equivalent of a theme park character who existed solely to be photographed refusing to smile. He was a soldier on active ceremonial duty, which carried actual security protocols, actual threat assessments, and an actual chain of command with actual consequences for deviation from bearing. He was also, and this was the part the YouTube videos never got to deeply, privately, fluently asterisk inside every single moment of every single shift. He saw everything. He cataloged everything. The man in the gray coat who'd been walking the same 30-foot stretch for 20 minutes, filed, assessed, not a threat, a man waiting for someone who was clearly running late and clearly not worth the wait, based on the increasingly theatrical sighing. The child who had separated from a tour group and was now pressed against the railing, face between the bars. Staring at Daniel with the specific intensity of someone trying to solve a maths problem. Daniel had noted the child's approximate age, 7, maybe 8, and the matching blue rucksack of the group guide approximately 12 feet to the left. He'd tracked both. The group guide found the child 11 seconds later. The photographer, proper photographer, camera the size of a small dog, tripod, the full performance, who had been trying to get a specific shot of Daniel against the gate for 40 minutes and kept repositioning because the light wasn't cooperating. Daniel had watched the man's frustration with something that wasn't quite sympathy but was adjacent to it. The light in October at this hour was genuinely difficult. None of this showed on his face. His face was a locked room. But inside that locked room, Daniel Finch was having an extraordinarily full Tuesday. Gary had not given up. He was now, and this was a new development, narrating the history of the bearskin hat to his wife, having apparently done additional research on his phone. "So the hats," Gary said, "are made from actual bear fur, Canadian black bear. And they don't, okay, this is the crazy part, they don't clean them like ever. The regiment doesn't clean the hats, they just replace them." His wife looked up from her phone. "That's not hygienic." "Well, they're not wearing them at dinner." Daniel was aware that the hats were, in fact, cleaned. He was also aware that the black bear sourcing had become a subject of ongoing public debate, and that the regiment had been in conversation about synthetic alternatives for several years, which he had opinions about. The synthetic prototypes he'd seen looked fine, actually, and he was not precious about the bare question in the way some of the older lads were. But none of this was Gary's business. Gary's phone came out. "Can I, honey, take a photo of me next to him? Not touching him, just next to." Daniel braced internally. Not because of the photo. Photos were fine. Photos were constant. Photos were the ambient noise of the job. He braced because Gary had taken 2 steps toward the sentry box and was now doing the thing Daniel had seen performed roughly 400 times, where a tourist positioned themselves beside a guard with the studied casualness of someone who thought they were being very sneaky about it. Gary stood beside him, roughly 18 inches away. Daniel could smell his aftershave, something citrusy, not unpleasant. Gary's wife lifted the phone.